a warrant for Shanice Gordon. We have reason to believe she's employed at this firm.
I don't care what warrant you have. You're not approaching any of my associates without a judicial warrant and proper authorization.
We're federal agents. Step aside or we'll charge you with obstruction. Actually, you need proper legal authority. This is a private workplace.
The standoff happened at 3:15 p.m. on a rainy spring afternoon in the conference rooms of Ellison and Associates in Minneapolis. What started as 3 masked ICE agents demanding access to a senior associate would escalate into an entire floor of legal professionals forming a human barrier to protect their colleague, a riveting confrontation captured on office security cameras that would go viral within hours, and a federal lawsuit that would ultimately award Shanice Gordon $13.7 million while exposing the perilous overlap of immigration enforcement and professional workplaces. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Shanice Gordon was 32 years old, a senior associate who'd been working at Ellison and Associates for 7 years. She was Jamaican-American, born in Kingston, but brought to the United States as a 6-year-old when her family fled economic hardship and instability. She'd grown up navigating public schools in Minneapolis, attended college on scholarships while working night shifts at a grocery store, and built a legal career representing clients who reminded her of her younger self, overlooked, underestimated, hungry for someone to see their potential. She was exceptional at her work, the kind of attorney other associates consulted for strategy on complex cases. The kind who could untangle convoluted contract disputes in ways that made settlement inevitable. The kind who stayed late to mentor junior clerks and never made them feel inadequate for needing guidance. Her legal briefs were meticulous. Her courtroom arguments were precise and devastating. Her clients, those who won their cases, remembered her by name and sent referrals years later. Yet her performance evaluations were glowing in private and dismissed in partnership discussions. Her colleagues admired her innovations, but her strategies were often credited to senior partners in client meetings. Her requests for lead counsel positions were routinely declined. She'd been overlooked for partner track twice, always for reasons that felt nebulous, always in favor of associates with shorter tenures and weaker case records. She'd become a United States citizen through naturalization when she was 21. She had the certificate filed securely at home with her passport and other vital documents. She had a driver's license. She voted in every election. She paid her taxes without fail. She'd even served on the Minnesota State Bar Association's pro bono committee the previous year, something that required extensive background verification. She was as American as anyone born within these borders, with documentation to prove it beyond question. The commotion began in the lobby. 3 figures in black tactical vests pushed through the glass doors at 3:15 p.m., rain streaking off their shoulders, boots striking the polished marble with deliberate weight. They moved past the reception desk without acknowledgement, ignoring the startled receptionist who rose from her chair, hand hovering near the phone. The lead agent flashed something, a folded document, an administrative warrant, but didn't slow his stride. His face was obscured behind a black mask. The others flanked him, silent, scanning the hallways like they were clearing hostile territory. The glass-walled offices amplified every sound. Boots echoing, radio static crackling, the rustle of tactical gear shifting as the agents turned toward the elevator bank. A clerk pushing a file cart froze mid-step. An associate glanced up from her desk, fingers pausing over her keyboard. Another leaned out from a conference room doorway, confusion tightening his features. The receptionist's voice rose, urgent but unheeded. "Excuse me, you need to sign in. Sir, you can't just..." They kept moving. On the 8th floor, Shanice sat at her desk, overlooking the rain-blurred skyline. A stack of discovery documents spread before her. She was deep in a section on liability waivers, yellow highlighter poised in her hand, when the muffled commotion reached her through the walls. Voices, footsteps, something wrong in their cadence. She lifted her head, listening. The sounds grew louder, sharper, closer. Her mind flashed backward without permission. Kingston. The cramped apartment where she'd slept on a cot beside her sister, traffic noise filtering through thin walls. Her mother's hands, roughened from cleaning jobs, counting bills on the kitchen table. The scholarship letter that had felt like a lifeline. The night shifts at the grocery store, stocking shelves while her classmates slept. The law school acceptance that she'd read 3 times before believing it was real. The naturalization ceremony where she'd raised her right hand and sworn an oath she meant with every fiber of her being. She blinked, forcing herself back to the present. The commotion was directly outside her door now. Down the hallway, managing partner Elias Thompson stepped out of a conference room, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp alarm as he took in the scene. 3 masked agents moving with tactical precision towards Shanice's office. No appointment, no escort, no explanation. He moved quickly, positioning his body between them and the door, one hand raised. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to stop right there." The lead agent didn't break stride. "We have a warrant for Shanice Gordon. Step aside." Elias didn't move. "You'll need a judicial warrant to access anyone in this firm. What you're holding is administrative, which doesn't grant you authority to disrupt a private workplace without proper legal. Step aside or we'll charge you with obstruction." The exchange drew more bodies into the hallway. Clerks emerged from the library. Associates abandoned their desks. A junior partner stepped out from a deposition room, phone already in hand. They didn't speak, they didn't coordinate, they simply moved, filling the corridor, their presence forming an unspoken barricade, a paralegal from the immigration division. A tax attorney who'd never spoken to Shanice directly. A first-year associate who remembered how Shanice had stayed late to review her memo on employment discrimination law. The human barrier grew denser, silent, resolute. Inside her office, Shanice gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles bloodless. She could hear Elias's voice through the door, firm and lawyerly, citing employee privacy statutes and Fourth Amendment protections. She could hear the agents radioing for backup, their language clipped and procedural, her heart hammered against her ribs. The memories wouldn't stop. Her sister's funeral, the closed casket, the grief she'd locked away because there were briefs to file and clients to serve and no space in a law firm for emotional unraveling. The microaggressions that had accumulated like paper cuts over 7 years, being mistaken for a paralegal by visiting clients, watching her case strategy presented by a partner who'd barely glanced at her memo, hearing vague excuses about cultural fit when partnership discussions arose. And now this, targeted, hunted, in her own workplace. The standoff stretched. 30 seconds became 2 minutes, became 5. The agents attempted to push forward. The firm held. No shoving, no violence. Just bodies occupying space, immovable. Elias kept talking, his voice steady, invoking precedent after precedent. Someone called the firm's in-house counsel. Someone else activated the security camera feed to ensure documentation. Rain battered the windows, blurring the city beyond into streaks of gray and gold. The atmosphere thickened with tension, silent defiance, meeting rigid authority in a corridor designed for depositions and contract negotiations, not confrontations with federal agents. At the 15-minute mark, the lead agent's radio crackled. More backup was minutes away. Obstruction charges were being prepared. Elias responded by citing landmark cases on workplace raids, his tone never rising, his position never shifting. Behind him, the barrier of colleagues tightened incrementally, a wall of pressed suits and crossed arms and quiet determination. Shanice sat frozen behind her desk, trembling. She'd been a citizen for 11 years. She had the paperwork. She had the passport. She had voted in 4 elections. She'd served on bar committees. She'd done everything right. And still, here they were. At 28 minutes, 2 more firm attorneys arrived, summoned from court. They reviewed the administrative warrant within seconds, conferring in low voices. One of them stepped forward, addressing the agents with the kind of polite hostility perfected in litigation. "This warrant lacks judicial authorization. It doesn't grant you access to conduct workplace enforcement without consent from the property owner, which you don't have. If you proceed, you'll be violating multiple statutes, and we will pursue every legal remedy available." The agents hesitated. Radio chatter intensified. Backup was stalled in traffic. At 30 minutes exactly, the lead agent stepped back. "This isn't over. We'll return with proper authorization." They retreated toward the elevator, boots echoing in reverse, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The barrier dissolved slowly, colleagues exhaling as though they'd been holding their breath underwater. Elias turned toward Shanice's office, his hand lifting to knock gently on the glass. She opened the door. Her face was composed, but her hand still shook. Elias's voice was quiet. "We've got you. We're documenting everything, and I'm bringing in an immigration specialist tonight. You're not facing this alone." Around them, the firm moved with purpose. Someone retrieved the security footage. Someone else began drafting an incident report. A clerk brought Shanice water. The junior partner who'd called in-house counsel sent a firm-wide email emphasizing solidarity and offering resources. But questions remained, unspoken but heavy. An anonymous tip, a faulty database, a naturalized citizen targeted in her own workplace. The rain continued outside, washing the city clean while leaving everything inside irrevocably changed. The footage leaked 6 hours later. A third-year associate, still shaken from the confrontation, uploaded the security camera recording to Twitter with a caption that read, "When your law firm becomes a human shield." The video was 19 minutes long, condensed from the full 30, and showed everything. The masked agents pushing through the lobby, Elias stepping into their path, the hallway filling with bodies. The tense standoff with voices rising and falling in legalistic combat, the agents' retreat. Within 2 hours, the tweet had 40,000 shares. By morning, it had breached 1 million. News outlets picked it up. Legal Twitter dissected every frame. Immigration advocacy groups amplified it with fury. Headlines proliferated. Law firm shields colleague from ICE raid. Lawyers form human barrier against federal agents. Viral footage exposes workplace immigration enforcement. The outrage was immediate and volcanic. Shanice didn't see any of it. She'd gone home that evening, locked her apartment door, and collapsed. The grief she'd buried for 3 years since the day she'd identified her sister's body in a hospital morgue after a car accident surged back with obliterating force. She called Elias the next morning and requested leave. He granted it without hesitation, assigning an immigration attorney from the firm's network to handle her case. She spent the first week in a fog. The apartment felt too quiet. She couldn't sleep. When she did, she dreamed of her sister's voice, bright and mocking the way it had been before the accident. The dreams always ended the same way, with silence, then the phone call from the hospital, then the unbearable weight of knowing she was gone. The second week, the immigration attorney came to her apartment with findings. His name was David Rosen, a specialist in wrongful detention cases, and he sat across from her with a folder thick enough to require both hands. The database match, he explained, had flagged a record for someone named Shanice Elise Gordon, born in Kingston, entered the United States as a minor. The details aligned perfectly except for one. The flagged record indicated an expired visa and a deportation order issued 8 years prior. The record belonged to her sister, who died 3 years ago. ICE had never verified the death certificate. They'd never cross-referenced biometric data. They'd never confirmed whether the person in their database still existed. They'd simply seen a name match and acted. Rosen's voice was careful, controlled. This isn't an isolated error. We're seeing a pattern. The databases ICE relies on are decades out of date. They don't integrate with vital records. They don't account for naturalization updates. They don't require multi-point verification before enforcement actions. And the errors disproportionately impact people with certain names, certain backgrounds. Shanice stared at the folder. Ethnic targeting dressed up as procedural efficiency. Outside her apartment, the public backlash intensified. Legal communities organized rallies. Op-eds flooded major newspapers questioning whether workplaces should be treated as enforcement zones. Social media debates raged. Think pieces proliferated. Advocacy organizations demanded ICE reform. The footage continued circulating, each share amplifying the pressure. Do you believe professional spaces should remain sanctuaries from unwarranted intrusions? Drop a comment with yes if you agree, or explain why not, and share this story to spark the conversation. At the firm, something unexpected happened. Colleagues began talking about Shanice, not just about the raid, but about her work. A junior partner mentioned the contract dispute she'd resolved 2 years prior, a case that had been heading toward protracted litigation until Shanice identified an obscure clause that forced immediate settlement. An associate recalled the employment discrimination suit where Shanice's research had been so thorough, so devastating, that the defense folded before trial. A clerk remembered how she'd rewritten an entire motion the night before filing because the original argument was weak, saving a client from summary judgment. Internal memos started circulating, emails praising her contributions, quiet acknowledgments of work that had been credited to others for years. The recognition felt surreal to Shanice when she heard about it, bittersweet validation arriving only because federal agents had tried to drag her out of her office. 3 weeks into her leave, Rosen returned with something else. Documents uncovered during lawsuit preparation. Immigration records that didn't align. A witness protection file buried in Jamaican government archives. And then, impossibly, the truth. Her sister hadn't died in a car accident. She'd faked her death. The accident had been staged, a burned vehicle, dental records substituted, a closed casket funeral that Shanice had attended in numb disbelief. Her sister had entered witness protection after exposing corruption linked to Jamaican political figures, individuals with international reach and long memories. The database flag wasn't negligence. It was a vendetta. And there was more. Rosen spread additional documents across her coffee table. Birth certificates, sealed court files, testimony transcripts from a case Shanice had never known existed. Her father, who died when she was 4, had been a whistleblower. He'd exposed financial crimes tied to the same network her sister had later targeted. The family lineage was a threat of resistance, and Shanice had inherited access to sealed evidence that transformed the lawsuit from a negligence claim into something far larger. A conspiracy, deliberate targeting, constitutional violations that reached beyond ICE into international coordination. Shanice sat in her apartment, surrounded by documents that rewrote her entire understanding of her family's history, and felt something shift. The grief didn't disappear, it never would. But beneath it, something harder took shape. Resolve. Her sister had fought. Her father had fought. Now it was her turn. She authorized the federal lawsuit. Fourth Amendment violations, Fifth Amendment due process breaches, 14th Amendment equal protection claims. Rosen assembled a litigation team within days. Discovery began immediately. Internal ICE emails surfaced, damning in their casual acknowledgement of flawed databases. We don't have time for multi-point verification on every name match. Just process the ones flagged and let them sort it out in court if there's an issue. Messages that revealed systemic shortcuts, procedural laziness, and an institutional indifference to accuracy when the targets were immigrants with unfamiliar names. While Rosen built the case, Shanice used her leave to dig deeper into the family documents. She found letters her father had written, never sent. Legal briefs her sister had helped prepare before going into hiding. Evidence that connected a web of corruption spanning 2 countries and 3 decades. The material became exhibits, leverage. Proof that this wasn't just about a mistaken database entry, it was about power weaponized against people who dared to expose it. The viral momentum continued. News cycles kept the story alive. Legal scholars wrote analyses. Immigration reform advocates held the footage up as evidence of systemic failure. The firm became a symbol proof that workplaces could be sanctuaries if people chose solidarity over compliance. And Shanice, absent from the office but omnipresent in the growing movement, prepared for the fight ahead. The trial began 8 months after the standoff. Federal court in Minneapolis, courtroom packed beyond capacity. Journalists filled the gallery. Immigration advocates lined the walls. Law students sat in the overflow room watching the closed-circuit feed. The air carried the weight of something larger than one woman's lawsuit. It felt like a reckoning. The full security footage played on the first day. 19 minutes expanded to the complete 30, every second documented in high definition. The jury watched the agents push through the lobby, watched Elias position himself as a barrier, watched the hallway fill with bodies, watched the tense exchanges, the radioed threats, the firm's unyielding defense. Several jurors leaned forward. One wiped her eyes. Testimony followed in waves. Staff described the instinctive decision to form the barrier, how no one had coordinated but everyone had understood. They spoke about Shanice, her mentorship, her brilliance, her quiet endurance of being overlooked. A junior associate testified about a complex trademark case where Shanice's strategy had been presented by a senior partner who'd barely reviewed her work. A clerk recalled overhearing partnership discussions where her name was dismissed with phrases like, "not quite the right fit," despite evaluations that called her exceptional. Expert witnesses dissected ICE's systemic failures. A database security specialist demonstrated how easily accessible death records were, how a single verification step would have prevented the error. An immigration policy analyst presented data showing patterns, names flagged for enforcement skewed heavily towards certain ethnicities, certain national origins. The evidence mounted into an indictment of institutional negligence dressed as procedure. Former ICE agents, subpoenaed and visibly uncomfortable, admitted under oath that procedural shortcuts were common, time pressure, resource constraints, an unspoken understanding that errors would be resolved downstream, in court, at someone else's expense. The emotional climax arrived when Shanice took the stand. She wore a navy suit, her hands folded calmly in her lap, but her voice carried the tremor of barely contained grief. She recounted the terror of hearing boots in the hallway, the humiliation of being targeted in her own workplace despite a decade of citizenship, despite documentation, despite everything she'd built. And then, quietly, she spoke about her sister. The faked death, the witness protection, the political conspiracy that had shadowed her family for decades without her knowledge. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. Shanice's voice didn't break, but tears tracked down her face as she explained what it meant to bury someone you loved, only to learn years later that the burial had been theater, that the grief had been real, but the death had been staged to protect a truth too dangerous to leave exposed. She spoke about her father, the whistleblower she barely remembered, the sealed evidence she now carried, the realization that her family's legacy was resistance, and that the database flag had been deliberate, a vendetta stretching across borders and years. The defense tried to argue good faith, agents acting on available information, procedural compliance within existing protocols, but the evidence was overwhelming. Death records accessible with a single search, biometric databases that could have confirmed identity, verification steps so basic, so routine, that their absence felt willful. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, liable on all counts. $4 million compensatory for emotional distress, career impact, and the trauma of being hunted in her workplace. $9.7 million punitive to deter future negligence and send an institutional message. $13.7 million total. The courtroom erupted. Advocates cheered. Journalists rushed for the exits to file breaking news. Shanice sat motionless, tears streaming, while Rosen squeezed her shoulder. The repercussions cascaded immediately. The 3 agents involved were terminated. ICE supervisors were reassigned. Policy reforms were announced: mandatory multi-point verification before workplace enforcement, integration of vital records databases, oversight mechanisms for ethnic targeting patterns. The changes felt insufficient to many, but they were changes nonetheless, extracted through litigation and public pressure. Ellison and Associates installed a commemorative plaque in the 8th floor hallway, in defense of dignity and justice. The firm established a legal aid clinic funded partly by Shanice's settlement, offering pro bono representation for immigrants facing similar threats. Applications flooded in within weeks. Shanice returned to work 3 months after the verdict. The firm welcomed her with quiet recognition, no fanfare, just respect. Her office remained the same, but her role transformed. Mentorship positions, input on hiring and partnership criteria, invitations to speak at legal conferences about allyship, about resilience, about the mechanisms of institutional racism and how they're dismantled. She carried scars. The years of being overlooked didn't vanish because a jury awarded damages. The grief over her sister remained, complicated now by the knowledge that the death had been orchestrated. But she also carried something else: proof that power underestimated could become power reclaimed. That truth, pursued with endurance, could reshape systems built to ignore it. Other firms studied the incident. Law schools incorporated it into curricula on workplace rights and immigration enforcement. ICE faced ongoing scrutiny, every subsequent raid analyzed through the lens of what had happened in Minneapolis. And Shanice, once a senior associate whose brilliance was routinely credited to others, became a symbol. Not of victimhood, not of spectacle, but of justice pursued methodically, relentlessly, until accountability became unavoidable.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.